Welcome. Today we're talking to one of my favorite people, Lisa Taniguchi, a fantastic lettering artist from Vancouver, and she is presenting two different typefaces that she is working on. We're going to take a look at them, give them a little critique, learn more about Lisa, and hopefully get these fonts on their way to becoming available to the masses. So first of all, Lisa, who are you?
So you've said a lot already, but yeah, I'm a commercial lettering artist. These are my first few fonts that I'm trying to work on. And I also am a graphic designer, I have a background in graphic design, and just love letters. So yeah.
Let's take a quick look at your fantastic work. Actually, Lisa, can you share your screen and just pull up your website and just maybe highlight one or two projects? Um, that might be more fun. In the meantime,
Yeah, for sure.
I'm gonna dip out and come right back in.
Sounds good. I am just waiting for my website to load. Currently, my internet is slow.
I was just on your side. It's really nice.
Thank you.
Like the mural work.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, wait, Lisa, you're supposed to be sharing your work.
I I'm waiting for it to load, but it's taking a very long time.
You're waiting for
I
your
don't know
website to
why.
load?
Yeah.
Oh, it worked okay for me. Let's see if it's working on my working perfectly on my end. Okay, in that case,
Oh, actually, no. Sorry, I got it. I opened it on incognito and it's fine. It's very strange, but my regular browser does not work.
all right,
Sorry
let's
about
take a
that.
look.
All right. So, I can take you guys through some of my favorite work. More recently, I've been doing more public art and murals, which has been really interesting, a lot of work. And so this one was, my first mural and a collaboration with a couple other artists. So I did the lettering portions, and so yeah, this was a couple of the walls that we did. So it's like a massive building, brand new construction. They were basically renovating and really old heritage building. So a lot of it was new walls and stuff like that. Lots of stucco, which is fabulous. But it was a very interesting project, very fun, a lot of hard work.
And this
That
is
was
like
one of
your signature reverse contrast script. So when I see this stuff, I'm like, Lisa, all day. There's no one else that can do it quite like you. It's just your kind of signature thing, right?
Yeah, yeah, which has been really fun. I've gotten to know this kind of style very, very well, which like you'll see a lot in my work. One of the ones that was probably one of my favorite projects so far has been this, which is taking that style, and it was the original inspiration, this W on the left. I actually created it for like a 36 days of type a couple years ago. And then Welcome Stranger, an agency in Hawaii, saw it and really loved it for a logo type for one of the hotels that they were working on for their branding. And so applying that kind of wavy reverse contrast script style to like Wayfinder Waikiki and then a number set was really, really fun. And
So
I
good.
kind of
God, it's
um,
painfully good, Lisa. I'm freaking out. I love it so much.
thank you. So the hotel just launched, so I don't really have a lot of like the application of this, but Welcome Stranger did like a fabulous job about like applying it, using it. The overall like brand identity was really well done, so tons of fun. And I learned that numbers in reverse contrast in kind of a script style is very interesting. But it was a fun challenge.
You know,
Um,
they came out really, really nice. And I think reverse contrast numbers, I don't know, sometimes they sort of make a little bit more sense. And really it's kind of reverse contrast, but the contrast is happening on a fairly conventional pen angle. So if you look at like the 2 or 3 or something, even like 5, it doesn't feel so crazy. I don't know, like it feels really natural in a good way.
I'm glad that you said that.
All right, cool. That's great. You can stop sharing. Thank you for allowing me to make you share your work on the spot like that. And you know what a fan I am of yours. And so I don't have to go on about that anymore. But you are kind of beginning this transition in from lettering artist and graphic designer into lettering artist, graphic designer, and type designer a little bit too, right? Which can maybe feel a little bit overwhelming or intimidating at first, but you've been making some really great progress on a couple of different typefaces. So just real quickly, I'll open that stuff up. But how have you been finding that process so far?
Um, I think it's familiar but different. I think the biggest thing from going from lettering art to type design is really thinking of it as a system, rather than kind of, with lettering, you can just do one-offs and make it whatever you want, and you don't really have to think about how what you're doing affects other things. But with type design, that is not true. And so I think that's like the biggest challenge, at least for me mentally, to kind of switch. Not quite there yet, but trying.
The system, everything is coming back to the system all the time. And yeah, that is the name of the game, and if it's not kind of working with the system, then the system has to change. I think that's kind of the big thing, the big difference between beginners and people with a little bit more experience sometimes is beginners. I know this from my own experience where I was very quick to try and put like a band-aid on the system instead of doing a fundamental reworking of the system for which a band-aid would not be necessary. You know what I mean? So the system, the system, the system, it's all there is, and it's all that's really important. So let's just look at some uppercase letters here. This is like another reverse contrast thing, classic Lisa. And it's kind of, I would say that the ideas that we have going on in here would be, you know, the noticeable contrast, reverse contrast, combined with some interesting forms, some rounded negative spaces that don't typically get rounded all the time. And these kind of brushy terminals. So where did this style come from, and am I appropriately explaining it?
Yes, and I think what I said about like having to think about it as a system kind of plays out here, because this first was inspired by some lettering that I did for a project and whatever, and I was like, okay, maybe I'll try this as my first foray into fonts. So some of the parts, so it's very accurate, but there's actually some inconsistencies, which is I'm hoping is kind of part of the concept of the font too. Like, it's a bit of a rule breaker. It doesn't quite always like, it's not super consistent in some of the applications. Like you said, some of it is rounded, but some of it is more of like this kind of brush style. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but
Yeah, I think having some amount of like unexpectedness or a chaotic element can be really good sometimes. I find a lot of times that a perfectly like even script font, for instance, that just has the stems hitting, at such an rhythmic cadence, can somewhat like legibility can suffer a little bit in that situation. So you kind of want to do these things to interrupt that, or play with texture in different ways. So yeah, I think that's a fine thing to include. I wouldn't suggest it maybe for someone's first typeface, but I don't really think of this as your first typeface exactly because you've done so much lettering and stuff. Like you're not really new to the thing in general. But we do have some stuff to talk about here. And all I'm trying to do with these sorts of critiques is emphasize everything that I think is great and successful about it, minimize maybe some ideas that don't necessarily need to be there, and just make sure that the viewer can appreciate all of the character and nuance that you're putting into these things. So just kind of emphasizing certain things, basically. Okay, let's get into it. I would say right away from a width perspective, everything is looking pretty good. We're doing this thing where the round letters like O and Q are, getting to be like this full width. And then even C and D and G to some extent are pretty wide. Rest of everything like E and F particularly, or L and J, get very narrow. So it's kind of playing with this idea of classical proportions too, kind of the old school Greek thing, which I think is totally working. And I know I'm looking at an OTF in RoboFont, which I maybe should not do. Let me just create a background layer here so I can some of your artwork on the background and iterate on top of it. Put an O back in and grab your Q tail. So the first thing that I noticed, I don't know why, but was just that I wanted to scale this down a little bit so I could emphasize this area of white space in here. A pretty small deal, really. But I think having that dip below the baseline and even getting a little bit more horizontal kind of character into the bottom of that negative space would just let it render a little bit more clearly. So that's where we were after. But now you can't really see where we were before, but you hopefully get the idea. Basically, I moved that from there to down here-ish. Yeah, relatively small deal. And just let me know if any of this stuff you totally object to, find personally insulting, Lisa, or have a problem with in whatever way as I'm going along this stuff.
It's actually funny when you threw this up, and you're talking about widths, I was like, oh, the K is actually quite a bit wider than the R, and I didn't really notice it until just now. I don't know if that's
Well, of
where you're
course,
going.
like all this stuff, it's not even like learning to draw, it's just learning to see, and stuff about width, especially. It's just such a tricky one to get a handle on. I don't know what the kind of metaphor for that would be in other disciplines, but it's very easy to not pay attention to width and kind of horizontal proportions like that, and just be obsessed with coming in here and like measuring all your positive spaces, like that's very easy. Like anyone can do the ruler tool, but to look at your K and say, oh, that feels a little bit wide, like that does take a little bit more practice. And I would tend to agree. With all these situations, though, we can grab a set of points and scale. Like that's going to be the fastest way to do that sort of thing. But having a wide K, I don't think is such a bad idea. I think the G of all the round shapes, C, D, G, O, Q, the G is the one that feels the most narrow. So I might grab that and kind of pull it out. It also has kind of more like, I don't know what I would call this kind of like energy here, but it feels like the pen angle is kind of coming through on a more tilted axis, kind of based on how far right these points go. So it just kind of seems like the thing that would more follow in line with what other stuff in your typeface is doing is just to center it a little bit more. It doesn't have to get like totally centered. And then we ask ourselves a question of, once we do that, does it feel right? What's lost? Does it feel like it belongs with everything else that we have going on? And that's something that really only you can decide, because obviously this project is coming from your hand, and it means something different to you. So I'm just giving my thoughts, and if you want to disregard it or parts of it, I say go right ahead. I'm fine with that. But I did add some overshoot here. 10 points is kind of, I feel like, a default starting amount to kind of judge that, and then come back to how things look in your space center or whatever you're using to judge spacing, and say, does the overshoot feel correct? You know, um, I would probably tweak it a little bit, but I would start with that, and then just quickly go through everything else that has overshoot. See, your D has overshoot. Uh-oh, this little
Oh,
stem has a little bit of overshoot, 3 units. I'll fix that real quick. Come over to your K, that would be the next one. So the K right now is only getting 2 points of overshoot, but it doesn't feel crazy because it probably doesn't need too much overshoot. Let's just see what it looks like with 10 points. Like, does that feel now like it's dipping below the baseline? Maybe. Kind of kick it up a little bit and just think about the distance between the baseline and the bottom of your max overshoot as a zone. It's not that everything has to hit exactly the same overshoot. It's just that it kind of has that amount of wiggle room in which to play. Your R is coming down the same amount. Maybe I would kick it down to something like 5. We could check out S. That's coming in at 10. That looks pretty good to me. We're missing an extreme point here. That's no big deal, and I would definitely add that stuff later in the game. Everything that's kind of more technical or production related, don't feel like you have to have that all figured out and completely dialed in while you're just working on artwork. You know what I mean? It's pretty geometric. You know what I mean is there's a lot of right angles, totally straight lines, things that are perpendicular. So in that case, when we see an S next to a T, we want things to line up exactly. And I think they are, but let's just double check that this is indeed at 186. It is. You're doing good there. But what's striking to me is something like Z, which comes in with a different measurement. So I would just kick that up a little bit. Not a big deal. Very easy fix. And then we, of course, have to check our contrast here. We probably don't need that point. So we can keep these as tangent points and figure out what our thin measurement is, which should probably come from the I. It's 96 on the I. It is 94 on the S, which is cool. I would kind of call that the same. 95 on the V. Okay, so we're at 94 to 96. And that means the Z has got to get quite a bit bigger. Just kind of scale them symmetrically, top and bottom, like that. Okay, so there's our Z. But now we have this kind of problem with the Y and the X going into the Z. I kind of see the reason that you want more
yeah.
math on the Y. Like, that totally makes sense to me. So there's a couple of different ways we could play this. Now, what I'll do, so grab your Y, and I'll make a copy of it, and I'll make a copy of it again, and just kind of begin to play around in these shapes, because it feels like not permanent. When we're just in a different alternate of a glyph instead of the actual glyph, it's like this cognitive thing sometimes where I just feel more free to like make a mistake, or try
Yeah.
something different. So I'm curious if you ever tried to round these interior shapes in kind of these diagonal crevices.
I didn't, and part of the reason was, and this is probably not logical, but like for example, where like for the D, where the kind of tail is hitting back to the stem, I um I I don't know, I kind of liked how it kept the brush stroke intact visually rather
Yeah.
than rounding it. So that was kind of my reasoning behind it. Um, yeah.
Hey, Lisa, I'm going to come in with some kind of crazy ideas right now. And again, I will not be insulted if you take it with a grain of salt and decide to go a completely different direction with this. But here's what I'm going to say. Get ready for it. The brush quality of this, I think you could remove from this typeface entirely, and it would still be an extremely strong typeface. In fact, it would still be just as strong, if not stronger, if you actually removed that idea. It's one of the easiest ideas to remove because it's happening on the fewest amount of characters. And if it hurts you to think about removing it, that's a good sign, you know? It's like you're pushing yourself enough. So I'll just remove it from a couple of things, see if we can kind of get that uh get these characters kind of working without it and compare the two. I I don't really know, to be honest. This would definitely be something where if I was working on this typeface, I would try both. I would put one in a stylistic set and I would just look at them, you know, look at them outside of a font application. Now I'm going to bring back in another idea, which is rounded interior corners. So it's like this R, while it is a little bit deviating from where you were, it's actually like doubling down on your ideas. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah.
It's taking one out and it's emphasizing another. So one idea has gotten eliminated and one's gotten like emphasized. This one, I feel like one always just needs a diagonal at the top. This is my own kind of personal agenda with one. And then if it's diagonal, it's going to need some overshoot. So you can ignore that as well. But since it is a uh, reverse contrast thing, I think adding in a serif there would now take it firmly into one land, and we can hit our
Yeah.
186 on that measurement. So now it'll align nicely. Also, the bottom serif on a 1 doesn't have to be symmetrical. It can save spacing problems a lot of times if it's larger on the left and smaller on the right side. I usually try and align something like that. So I feel like maybe that looks more like a 1. I don't know. That's up to you to decide. I got a little bit sidetracked because I was talking about these Ys. Okay. Maybe these just need a little bit more weight in them. I don't know, dude. I feel like that's a sick Y. It's just maybe that's me. I don't know, but I think it is playing within your set of rules here. Another option for the Y would be to take something like, I guess we could take a U as a starting point and throw a J on it. I'm just trying to do my quickest way of getting a prototype of this form of Y, you know?
Yeah. I tried. Y was one of the characters that I had a lot of different versions.
Yeah.
And I tried something similar to this, and I was kind of not feeling it that much. But
I understand. This is just me being neurotic at this point where I have to try it, and I'm kind of curious about this interior rounded corner thing to see how that's going to work out in here too. if I come back and fix that stuff. I love working on other people's fonts because it's like I nothing is like for real right now, we're just kind of in this like imaginary play zone with it. And if we do something that works, great. If we don't, or we hate everything, it's like, hey, nothing's permanent anyways. Okay, Jamie, are you seeing this? Why? Amy's out of here. She's like not even listening
Can you
anymore.
hear me? I'm right here.
Oh,
I
there you
can
are.
see the Y.
What do you think?
About the Y?
Yes.
Well, I think I think the Y looks cool, but even though it's supposed to be really big and thick on the bottom, it still looks a little bit almost heavy.
Oh,
I kind of
you're
like the
right.
other one.
You're right. It's too heavy.
Oh, okay.
That's the correct measurement.
Yeah, that's better.
So if we put the L into a Y, that should be a clean. Ooh. Looks like our
Nope.
Y or L is coming in at 200. And so that's gotta, yeah, I think that would be a good time to come in with the ruler. I get the right side bearing on my L real tight, Lisa, to just make sure that, because L always has a bunch of right of it. And I always should, test these kind of hypotheses as they come up. But like HLH, that looks pretty good. Maybe I could add like a hair more spacing to that there. Silly, LOL. So for all my letters in the alphabet, I have a script that brings up a kind of test sequence at the bottom where it has the letter in question duplicated in the middle of a word and at the beginning of a word and at the end of a word. That's a little shortcut I found that kind of makes this easier. Okay. All right. I feel like we're cruising along here. And Z, okay, this is a different part
Oh yeah, this is
of the brushiness,
this is yeah. This is an alternate of the Z that I was playing around with just because I was like, oh, what if, because I like that kind of bottom, but then it kind of
Uh,
messes with it feels really different, and maybe it felt a little bit too extreme. So I also had like a two alternate with the same kind of bottom.
got it.
But yeah. So I don't know if I actually dig it, but
I think it actually is a good place for a Z, but it's kind of playing with this, like, I think elsewhere in the typeface, you're saying that the brushy quality comes in as a feature on the terminals. Having it kind of affect the letter in a different way, now we're looking at it with speed punk turned on. It just, it feels a little bit like it belongs to a different typeface. I wonder if maybe that's all it needs is the terminal only, or if there was a way to draw this so that it was kind of like more clearly a separate stroke. Let's try it. If we
yeah.
do something, this is going to be bizarre, but you kind of get the idea. If we do something like that, I'm unconvinced of the efficacy of this idea, but just something to play around with. I don't know. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about weight because this is a somewhat brutalist typeface in the way that these things are happening, where the corners are getting so rounded that something like a W gets very dark. Now the W is kind of like the darkest thing on the page. H is obviously going to be a lot lighter because it only has one horizontal, a lot more mass in the O. So I don't know. I might just send that current version to the background and then start playing with adding in a little bit more white space into here. Obviously, we don't want to come in too tight because we're still, we still enjoy the motif that it's given. But yeah, maybe this feels like a more generous curve too. So I could squeeze this shape just a little bit, let the outside come in slightly. And yeah, now we've removed a good chunk of mass from it.
Mhm.
Now, I'm thinking, Lisa, I'm doing all these edits to the typeface, but does it matter? Are we seeing a return on our investment? Jamie, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the main thing that was kind of sticking out to me was like the W, like just having a little that heaviness in there next to the H, which was like it's just the nature of this type of thing with the reverse contrast that it would look like that. But I think you're making some. For me, it's looking good. I would like to see the measurement. I think it's just an optical illusion, but the H measurement on the inside, the horizontal, it just feels light
152.
compared.
So it's 150. I kind of see why it is 152. Let's make it 186 like everything else because it's getting these crazy brackets, right? As soon as we have the brackets with, I don't know, maybe that does indeed match the weight of something like an O a little bit more. I was going to say the other option that you have in a reverse contrast typeface like this is to do that sort of thing. I think that's probably too significant of a vibe shift. I don't know if I would really go ahead with this. I like this because it's something that like I would not really think to do, and it feels very Lisa to me. So that's cool. So the X, personally, I might apply the same kind of Y treatment I tried before, where these interior shapes were getting like broken apart and rounded in the middle. I don't really know if that would work perfectly, that sort of thing. And it doesn't have to be as generous everywhere. Like you can change the size of them and play with that stuff. Maybe this letter is a little bit too wide and it can get a little bit narrower in here. I don't know. Let me just add a little bit more. Yes. These negative shapes. Interesting. I'm unconvinced. Okay. Another X to play with would, of course, be two V's, this sort of thing. Just
Yes,
that.
that was my original the original X that I had.
No. Yeah.
And yeah.
It's just not as fun, right?
Yeah.
You could keep that in as an alternate if you wanted to. I personally find alternates are like the best way to have your efforts go completely unnoticed because people rarely use them. But
Yeah.
okay, all your numbers I think are looking great. I don't think there's a whole lot to say here, but I would continue to think about the weight. I think now that we added that weight, Jamie, to the crossbar of H, something like the 8 stands up quite a bit better. But I would still think about doing the rounded interior shapes on a place like that. Even if it
I
was
feel like
like,
we saw another 8. Wasn't there another 8 in there? Am I
are you
missing
thinking
something?
about are you thinking about the YTT 8?
Oh, maybe yeah, that really stuck
Because that
out.
8 was sick. It kind of stuck with me too.
Okay, yeah, that's what it was.
That 8 was wild.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, it was kind of like barely an 8, Lisa, I'll be honest with you, but I really admire the kind of chutzpah that it required to get there. Okay, now that's just playing with a rounded interior shape in there.
Yeah.
Something to think about. 7 as well. So this is a place where I would thinking about your A or your V or kind of the more brutalist nature of some of these shapes, that one would be one that I expect to see quite a bit more straightforward, just like classic diagonal in there. And we do have a little overshoot in the 7.
Whoops.
No big deal. No one's judging you. We are on your side. Hey, Jamie, how often do I make mistakes like that in Ono fonts before you get them?
Am I supposed to say this? You're my boss.
All the time. I'm sloppy, to be honest. Like, I think I'm more of a big picture kind of guy at the end of the day. I just couldn't resist doing a little bit more tweaking on this 8. I wouldn't normally do it like this. Just to show you, I would probably work on half of this at one time, always, and get it as dialed in as I possibly can. Make all the tweaks that I need to. Make sure all the shapes are kind of lined up well enough so that they can just kind of attach onto itself in an easier way, and emphasize that a little bit more. Finally, I sometimes do a pass with SpeedPunk 8 extension that just allows you to look at the curve on through like the how much speed it's kind of creating, which is kind of a weird term, but makes sense when you think about it. Then once you get the half the way you want, you know, you just got to attach it and respace it. And look, I've drawn chi. What the fuck is wrong with me? This is like not what I wanted to do. Okay, you get the idea. I love this style, Lisa. We could pick it apart all day and make little refinements. But I think in general, the spirit is great, and you've captured a really interesting vibe in surprisingly few moves. Personally, I would remove just that one brushy ingredient so we can focus more on what else is going on in here. And the last couple of things I'll talk about before we move on, because we've now spent probably a little more time than I thought, is
I was hoping you did talk about that.
Oh yeah,
I was struggling.
Anything in particular, I'm totally happy to talk about it in whatever way. Use our paintbrush extension, and this is something that our designer Colin worked on, and I think is really doesn't seem to be working the way that I thought it would right now. In that case, let's just start drawing using different bits and pieces of your letters. So let's grab the top of the 0. Oh boy, RoboFont is breaking on me right now. I'm just going to save this, restart RoboFont real quick, because this is a very classic thing that happens all the time, as you know. I want to grab as much stuff from other letters and kind of piece them together in a way that makes sense so that we can not create anything from scratch, basically.
Yeah, I was trying to do that with for the ampersand, and I couldn't find a way to make it work. I was just really struggling.
I mean, yeah, that's basically all that we're doing at the end of the day is Tim Gunn style, make it work, designers. And I think you always can. I'm just grabbing your diagonal from 7, putting more of a skew on it, and Frankensteining these pieces. I'm not trying to go for perfection at this stage in the game. I'm just roughing it in, you know what I mean? Even this diagonal here, Maybe I'm going to get to about there. This is the equivalent of like a figure drawing class or something like that, where you're just using like your whole arm and your shoulder and every like large muscle in your body to kind of get something really quickly into place and then begin piecing it together, I guess. I'm trying to keep the contrast reverse, so I'm trying to keep that diagonal thin, which is kind of a tricky bit of the equation, but it actually helps us in the ampersand because there's so much going on in the middle of this glyph. So if we can just go a little easy on ourselves and understand that the middle is just going to be thin, then that part's not going to get too dense, right? That's kind of the problem that I'm trying to figure out. How do we keep the middle a little bit more clean with these like 4 or 5 strokes all intersecting in different places? Is this kind of like watching paint dry right now to go from scratch more or less?
No, no. I mean, I'm super slow in glyphs, and so I'm just kind of like, wow, you're doing it so fast.
I mean, I have done it before, Lisa. I've spent more time I've spent more time in RoboFont than like my 5-year-old daughter has been alive. Sometimes I think about that. It's like kind of weird. Okay. Feel like we're getting somewhere. This is like default, to me, this is
Mhm,
like kind of a boring solution that's technically hitting the criteria, but is not going to inspire anyone. You know what I mean? And
mhm,
maybe what's interesting. So what I would do in this part of the process now is, make my tweaks, get my measurements okay. I don't want to spend a ton of time dialing this letter into perfection because I'm not even sure that it's the right idea yet. So right now I would call that letter like 70%, you know? It's not perfect, but it's kind of a prototype of the idea and I can space it a little bit better. Something like that.
mhm,
Save that, copy paste it, and now I go back to the original because I know whatever I'm going to do from here is going to be a little bit improved, and I want to look at how it relates to something like the A. So first of all, I'm seeing that it needs more weight, like a lot more weight, and I'm seeing that it could maybe just start knocking out some of these things. What happens if we knock that out, refine that shape so it just feels like a little bit more natural. We could even do something like make it a little bit more bottom heavy or kind of high waisted in a way.
mhm,
Does that make sense? We're kind of playing
mhm,
with the waist element in some of these glyphs, and maybe I'll even try and do something crazy like throw in one of those guys over there or over here. I'll just start trying some stuff. Go to A, grab our counter, place it in, scale it in. Okay, this is feeling very weird, almost like alien right now. But I think that this typeface could use some like more eccentric stuff going on in the punctuation. You're so comfortable drawing letters, like this is such a big part of your life already. And I feel like you've just not spent the same amount of time in punctuation land. So yeah, I don't know. I'm totally not convinced by this shape, so I'll kind of try it again in a different way. Now, instead of the idea of the rounded interior shapes that we got from the A, I'm going to borrow some move that's basically what's happening on like your R and your K, put that into the tail here. Okay, that's solving a couple of problems for me. One, it's adding more weight. Two, it's making it a little bit less boring. And yeah, I would say that's starting to look like a little bit of a win. Not perfect, and these things could always use more love, but hopefully you're getting the idea. All we need to do is make it hit that 186 measurement, of which we have become so fond in our journey together. And now we can look at the before and the after. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Lisa. That's it for the oddball, unless there's anything else that you want to ask about this typeface.
No, I don't think so. Ooh, I like it when it's a little bit wider. I feel like
Same.
that
I was
feels,
just,
yeah.
I felt like it needed a little bit,
Looks like a
little
hockey
more
stick.
space. What'd you say,
Yeah,
Jamie?
yeah.
It looks like a hockey stick in a very good way.
A hockey stick, exactly. Got that hockey stick terminal. That's what it should be called. Okay. Let's jump over. I'll save that for no real reason in particular and jump over to the reverse contrast script.otf. This is
Which
great.
has only 5 things, but
Dude, that's exactly where you want to be. And look at this, though. Look at how cool this is. Jamie, what do you think?
It's beautiful. It's totally got Lisa's signature already.
I think so. Yeah. All right. So when we are in script land, we live and die by this. That's happening right here. So I would just spend a little bit of time, Lisa, to make sure that this indeed is exactly what we want it to be. And I see it missing a handle. So that's not a huge deal. Let me add a background layer on this again. So I can keep one on the background, add in the point, and then rematch it to where it was before. It's really important for how fonts render on screens that each curve has a handle from both directions, which I see you do, Lisa, like 95% of the time. There's just a handful of spots where I've seen it missing in both of these typefaces. So I think now would be a good time to just kind of comb through and see what needs it, but it's not a big deal, and that's not a step that takes a lot of time. There's always going to be things like that that happen that just require a little bit of love and attention, and hopefully it becomes like a meditative process for you, basically. But this is killer because it's hitting a really nice rhythm. This is the hardest thing we try and teach a lot of times, is to just get these foundational letters of the alphabet into a really good spot. And you've done it, I think, exceptionally well. And I'm amazed at, yeah, just the patience that requires, you know. HIMNU. Everything is really loose in a nice way. And it's not like a real fatiguing rhythm, because even like the difference between your N and your U, I kind of like. I like that there's some variation there. You know, you could come to your U and say, oh, I want it to do the exact same thing as N, which would be something maybe more like that. But I see why you didn't do that also, because you're trying to get this little negative space that I've highlighted here, this little triangle, to be more or less what's created in between letters, right? That's kind of the thing that's
Yeah.
going on. It's a super smart move, and it's really kind of like almost a secret in a way that you're doing that, and people would never really notice it, but it's going to make everything look really cohesive and natural and working well with default letters. Killer. Come to the eye, get this a little bit away from the letter and even like scaled up. I think you could do it like 200%, and just kind of have it become a bit more of a feature instead of something that you're kind of trying to play down in a way. Now, I'm going to see if we have enough in here to build ourselves a lowercase a. And my hunch is that there's plenty in here. If I remember, your Waikiki A is kind of doing that sort of thing. Is that correct?
Yeah, in that one it was, yes. Yeah, it's kind of like that kind of.
I mean, that's a viable option. Jamie, what do you think?
Yeah, it looks really good. And it like the space between the stem and the bowl of the N has like a similar feeling. So I like it.
Okay, but I feel like there's some hesitation with Lisa on this form. What's going on in your mind right now, Lisa?
Oh, well, because this was for like the Wayfinder Waikiki one was definitely like this. But usually when I'm drawing my A's, and this is something that I'm trying to figure out, is like I'm not trying to replicate my like reverse contrast lettering. I'm trying to make a font that's inspired by it. But it's usually like instead of having it cross over the top, it's usually a little bit more, I guess, I don't know, normal. I don't know if that's the right way of putting it, but like it'll just come and round out and then hit the stem again.
Totally. Let's do that.
And then, yeah.
So what you're saying is something a bit more traditional, kind of into this sort of zone?
Yeah, pretty much.
And then it is indeed reverse contrast, so we got to add some mass, right?
Mhm.
And I'm just looking at this compared to the same part of your N, and cool. Yeah, your N and your I and everything is looking a little bit more slanted, so I know that the top of this needs to just scoot over to the right a little bit, and maybe even the top of this letter no longer needs a bunch of mass at the top, because we're not trying to
Mhm.
balance anything that's not there, like on the U or the I that has a more open shape on top, because the A has that whole thing. This stem could actually remain quite thin, and it's fine. It's just really up to you how much life or how much curve you want to keep in there. And I guess the other option would be making it completely round in there.
Mhm.
Also,
Yeah.
also viable. Okay, cool. So that's the A. That'll give us B, D, P, Q. All good things to have in there. Now I want to get like an O. And so now that we have a letter that's kind of round on the top and the bottom like an A, I think that should be somewhat doable. We just kind of grab half of that A, and that would be our first step, right? Is to try and get to some version of the O that's not, I don't know really how to articulate this, but my pet peeve with O's or anything is just something that feels totally static, you know? I feel like if we're not worrying about drawing these letters perfectly symmetrical, and so much of this typeface is just more humanist anyways, and you kind of get to forms that are a little bit more lively and dynamic, like the rest of this typeface. That's all I'm trying to do here.
Mhm.
But now we're at a letter that feels too narrow, and way too widely spaced. So first of all, I would get it a little bit wider. Italic O is truly the worst shape to draw. I think we could all agree. It's one of the hardest things, and the things for me that require like the most amount of tweaking and editing and stuff. I don't even want to worry about measurements of the ruler tool right now because I just kind of want to get it into a place that's happy-ish, you know. Again, just doing a sort of a proof of concept at this stage. And then I would worry about, oh, what am I going to do on connections? So do you have a thought on connections in this typeface, or were you more thinking like, you know, I'm going to connect where it's easy, but if it's not easy, I'm just not going to connect it?
To be honest, I haven't thought that far yet.
Love the honesty, Lisa. All right, well, let's try and throw in a connection and just kind of see how it looks. So I already had the A in the background layer of this typeface, so I'm just throwing in some sort of shape that is kind of imagining what it would look like wrapped around. And all right, kind of ugly, but again, keeping it loose. I'm gonna space it. Oh, way too wide. So maybe we could take that whole thing and scoot it way over. Now I'm gonna respace again, and yeah, we're getting basically where we would want to be. At this point, seeing an angle or kind of something hit that's such an obtuse angle, like it's 170-degree angle right there, would definitely be one that I just make the strokes flow into each other, because that's going to be the least noticeable thing at that point.
Mhm.
Connect it, close the shape, and all right. I mean, it connects. It's spaced in the middle of these two glyphs. Maybe we could scoot it a little bit to the left. Yeah, that feels a little bit better spacing wise. Maybe it's a little bit too dark with how that thing wraps around now. And it also doesn't feel quite slanted enough. So even though this will make everything not on the extrema anymore, I think I would just kind of rough in a more italic feeling thing like that. All right. That gives us an O. The O would obviously give us the C and the E. And between those things, I think you would be well on your way to the rest of the lowercase alphabet in here.
Awesome.
In the land of script capitals, you know, the options are endless, as you know. But I would personally really love to see things that were big in this typeface that really contrasted the lowercase, and even adding in ascenders and descenders that were long enough to kind of stand up to that stuff. You have such a nice way of dealing with your caps that I think that would actually be an easier part of this. There's so much rigor and technique and like strategy in script lowercase, and then caps are like kind of one-offs that do
Yeah.
more or less what they want to do, and you don't have to worry about the connections in the same way. So we went way over on time. Now I'm realizing. Is there any other questions in your mind, or was this helpful or not helpful? What do you think?
It was very helpful. So thank you for the time. I mean, in terms of like questions, I think like the whole spacing and kerning and everything is a bit daunting, and so I feel like I still have a lot to learn in that sense, but obviously not for today. But yeah, I think this was hugely helpful, and even just like going through that ampersand was very helpful because I was really struggling with it. And I think you're right about the punctuation. Like I haven't spent that much time on it, so I kind of went to a lot of defaults for them. So So that's something definitely for me to take away too. So, and I will do a pass of the font without the like kind of brush script thing just to see, and then I'm gonna, you know, like compare the two, maybe see how they're feeling, and yeah, go from there. So thank you.
Right on. Well, thank you, and thank you for letting us record this and broadcast it out to the world. Hopefully other people can get something out of it too. Okay, I'm gonna hit stop recording now.